We have flown in Dr. Gareth Stanton all the way from Peckham, and
on a private jet.
On a private jet, absolutely. And Gareth has a background in anthropology, ethnography, and cultural studies within literature and art. He spent a number of years as Goldsmiths University's head of the Department of Media, Communications and Cultural Studies, and is currently focusing on his interests in visual culture and world cinema. We will be joined by Hikmat Darmawan, who is an Indonesian film critic who we are very fortunate to have with us here today in London. And Hikmat will be able to offer some context to the film that we may have missed. So I'd like to invite Dr. Gareth and Hikmat to the front. So I guess first of all, what did you make of the film?
I don't know. Did we keep the windows slightly open so because you were aware that we'd all be very scared?
I think.
Never look at windows again.
It's what's interesting for me. It obviously alludes as a genre film. It's a classic horror film. It's that waking up, who am I? What am I? Sort of film. It has depths to Japanese horror. It has depths to sort of Korean horror, and the whole sort of Blair Witch Project, sort of lost in the forest, video cameras, funny found footage,
Yeah.
and it's put together very, very elegantly. It's very strong as a film. It's beautifully crafted. As you said, it's a low budget film, but it's still the tension is there. The sort of tricks and the tropes of to this particular genre trade are brilliantly executed. It's always an issue with these sorts of films to try and find the story and the sense and track the narrative, and I sort of, that sort of goes a bit AWOL towards the end. I wasn't sure what was going on by the time I got to the end, to be perfectly honest. But I enjoyed the journey.
Yeah. How about you?
Sam, the first time I saw the movies in Jakarta in the cinema, nonetheless, very short time in the cinema, because as we talk about the choice of making this in English is alienating. I was alienating the viewer in Indonesia, of course. So it kind of shown in for just few days. I watched with 5 or 6 or so people. I think that's the most that watch the movies during that day. So, well, I kind of lost myself, of course, the first time I saw it, and I didn't like the movie the first time I saw it, because I compared it with the previous work of Joko Anwar. Of course, at that time I knew that this is his experiment in low-budget movie making. At that time, what would I say? And at that time, Joko made several short movies, some very charming short movies, I should say. It's not really like this. So now, watching again, I appreciate more about the technicalities. At that time, you see, the first time I saw the movies, I already knew that Joko is a very good director in terms of creating good storytelling, technicalities of making movie and so on. But so I kind of took that for granted from Joko, But now I saw this movie again, and I appreciate more about the craft, and also I kind of pick the sense that it's about the, I cannot help thinking about the current situation in Indonesia. You wake up in the morning and you didn't know what to do. you don't know who you are. The tension, all the violence surrounding me through my Facebook. For example,
Right.
the video of something and someone got something and so on. So the uneasiness, I cannot pick that in the movies, and I think I cannot help thinking that probably this is the kind of escapism that the movie offered, at least now, for me. Because in some twisted way, it is really nice that with all that chaotic situation in Indonesia, for example, in my situation in Indonesia, it would be really nice that somehow I'm the one in control somehow. So when after the half of the movies, the role is reversed, and we found out that the victim, actually the perpetrator of this whole circus, I cannot help thinking that it is nice to have that kind of fantasy, you know?
Right.
Amid all the chaotic things
So it's
that I saw,
interesting.
yeah.
It's almost like escapism, but based on things that are very relatable
Yeah,
to you,
it
when
was
you
that
wake up.
kind of escapism,
Right. Yeah.
not as a survivor, but as a perpetrator. So yeah, well, yeah, I cannot help thinking about that. I pick up the sense of the uneasiness very strongly.
Right, yeah, and something I wanted to talk a bit about, which was something that you mentioned, was one of the first things that stands out about Modus Anomali is its decision to use the English language as opposed to Bahasa Indonesia for its dialogue, which in itself is fairly unusual for Indonesian cinema. And I wonder what significance you would place to making that decision, and whether you've encountered other non-English language speaking countries which have also produced a film in a foreign language, essentially.
It does happen, certainly. I mean, obviously the sort of currency for English, the first suspicion that one has is that this is made in English because it's hoping to hit the genre market worldwide rather than the local Indonesian market. Hikmat has said that actually it didn't do much box office business in Indonesia itself because of that decision. And the possible drawback is that once you opt for English, you've got to do it pretty well, and there are times when it's not possibly. I don't like to be critical, but it doesn't come across as the naturalism fails and falls on its face at times in the film. So, in some respects, that undermines the sort of project of producing a genre film. I mean, it does the genre well, but the language gives it away. I mean, there's very little in the film that tells you anything about national specificity. You don't actually. It's quite hard to tell where the film comes from unless you know.
Right.
And there's some Nutella. There's a reference to New Zealand. And if you're good at biology, you can say what sort of forest it is and what the trees are. But beyond that, and what's actually eaten, which is sort of generic, sort of Western style breakfasty stuff, and there's some reference to bacon, which itself is curious in a way. But there's nothing to say this is an Indonesian film.
Except the song, one
There's
song.
one that does- okay.
But you can treat it like world movies, world song, world music.
It's an interesting point. I want to return to the bacon moment in a moment, but something that Hikmat mentioned was how the film alienated the local Indonesian market, and perhaps, like you say, as well as the language, there are certain cultural references which were perhaps non-traditional Indonesian. And do you think that the film may have been trying to do that on purpose, to create a distance at all?
I don't know. Joko always avoid to answer that question. Of course, I ask. and many journalists ask also. But he always think that the notion that the supposition that the movies choose the English language as the language of as a tool for marketing to the wider market internationally. It's kind of shallow, but I don't. I actually thought that there is some truth in it, you know. But Joko always ignored the question and look down to the question. But he always emphasized about the non-nationality of the movies.
Right.
Mhm.
He always play with that whenever he questioned about the choice of the language. Whether it is really alienated the market, yeah, I think it is. But well, as I say before, my mom watched the movie and very depressed.
Your mum was
Yeah, and she didn't ask me. She didn't ask me. She just went to the cinema and just watched it. Well, you know, she didn't watch cinema for a long time, and she wanted to see Indonesian movies, and she got this.
So this was the film that she chose to return to the cinema for.
Yeah,
Right.
apparently at that time there's no Indonesian movie. There's no other Indonesian movie at the cinema that she chose. But well, joking aside, I think that it can tell me something, because I think my mom kind of, I always we watched Godfather together. She didn't really have a high education. She didn't really understand English, but she really liked Al Pacino in Godfather and Dog Day Afternoon. So,
Oh, right.
yeah, so she's very very pure in terms of watching cinema, for me at least. And she didn't like it because the movie gave her the alienating feeling, you know. And is it about the cultural reference? Probably, because even the Indonesian song played in this movie is very alienated, very alien to my mom.
Right.
It's an independent song by Sore, and Sore is very, very highly regarded in Time magazine at once, but and in the young generation. But for me, it's always kind of alien also. I like, because I like the 70s songs from UK, from America, but my mom didn't really pick up that kind of music. This cultural reference, for example, all the genre movie, the horror genre movies that Joko dig in exploit in these movies and all that. So it's very alienating, more in one layers, not just the language, but all of the the universe of these movies.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry, a little bit. Speaking about the universe, some of the avid audience of Joko's movies think that all of Joko's movies, he created a universe through his movies. So they find little things, little clues that send message about others Joko's movies. So it's kind of a game for many of
Intertextuality.
Intertextuality,
The academics
yeah,
call
yeah.
it.
But Joko always refused to say that he make movie with a message. Political message or obvious, idealistic message or so on. He always said that he make movie to have fun, and so yeah.
And I couldn't help wondering whether the character there, when he looks at his ID card and he's Jonathan Evans, I thought of Gareth Evans and the Raid, an Indonesian film made by a Welshman with sharing my name,
Yeah.
actually, that does do international business.
Yeah.
And I know they're friends, they know each other.
Yeah.
Whether that was quite a little
I forget the timeline.
reference
Yeah.
going on. I think they must have been about the same time, the two movies.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
good.
insider joke, yeah.
Now, I want to talk a bit about Bacon. Something that is often quite evident with Indonesian cinema on the whole is the significance of religion, both on the surface and in more underlying examples. So with Modus Anomali, for example, we see a character who is seen to be incredibly immoral, who is covered in tattoos, which perhaps from an Indonesian perspective may suggest that he might not be, or he may be a non-religious or perhaps a non-Islamic character, and you add that to the references to bacon as well, and certain things like that. And I wondered if this was something that you'd seen before in Indonesian cinema, where if we see a character performing perhaps questionable acts, if we create a distance by showing them to not be particularly religious or Islamic, and yeah, I wonder what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. I would have thought it would be hard to put a religious interpretation on this film, other than it being a sort of portrayal of some version of evil. I suppose one could say in that respect it has a religious tendencies, but yeah, I'd be interested whether the bacon is stuck in there to sort of further emphasize a distance from Islam. I don't know. I think that would probably be straining an interpretive sort of efforts. But there's nothing that there are. As I said, it's sort of entirely generic, apart from the very few references, the bacon and the Nutella. There's very little tattooing. Tattooing.
Well, this particular movie, this particular movie, I think, is not really referred to any religious or unreligious statement, but the overall works of Joko Anwar is very interesting, I think. For example, the latest one, the Satan Slave, he got one of the clerics character, spoiler alert, killed by the zombies, and it is a very interesting choice, and for me personally it's very refreshing to see that, because Indonesia during New Order regime, they have a regulation, they regulate actually to portray evil must be lost by religious character. So it is written among many other rules also during Suharto's era that ended 1998. So when 2000s we saw the advent of Indonesian movie, new Indonesian movies, we saw horror movies, and many of them didn't like to include religious character. So it's just the secular, protagonist dealing with evil and won. So it is interesting. At some point, I saw one movie actually portray an image of villagers surrounded by evils, and they chanting something, but not Islamic Quran verse, no. But something in Javanese. It's very peculiar for me, because you see the scene that usually filled with the Quranic references, as opposed to villagers do in our life, and then you forced to fill it with other things, and then Joko Anwar came with all these movies, the genre movies. About the tattoo, I think, I don't think Joko referred to some meant it as a religious statement, but I think visual statement. It's cool, you
Right.
know. It's a visual, you know. It's effect, not visual effect. It's a visual impact that he looked for that as the tattoo in the character.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's that's what I do.
Yeah.
Mm.
So at this stage, I was wondering if we could turn it to our audience instead. Does anyone have any questions at all for either of our panelists at all? So, I want to, we got one.
What are other Joko and Anwar movies like? What kind of themes do you touch on? In some of these?
Yeah, I mean, you know the work better than I do. I mean, he's very varied. I mean, he's taken on a variety of different genres, all with great aplomb. Actually, he's a great filmmaker. I think he's.
Yeah. You really like horror movies, of
No,
course.
of course. I actually, you can
really
find
like-
you can find on the internet. He did a program with Vice about
Yeah.
New Order horror films, which is a nice
Yeah.
little.
A miniseries,
Which is good. But he's an enthusiast. He's a cinephile. I mean, he's like Tarantino in that sense. He's studied film. He watches film closely, and he understands the rules of genre and the techniques. And, you know, he's got.
Tarantino, I think, is the name that I also always think about seeing the career of Joko Anwar.
Yeah,
He's Tarantino's generation, right? Have same traits, cinephilia and so on. You get it right. And about the genre, of course, many of his works are horror, but now today is the announcement of his new film about superhero, Indonesian superhero. And the first movie that he directed was comedy. Romantic comedy, I think. Janji Joni, right? Janji Joni. And after that, he made Kala and Pintu Terlarang, Forbidden Doors, and Modus Anomali. And Copy of My Mind is very interesting. It's a political movie, but I think it's the best of his work so far. Copy of My Mind. I really like the movie. I kinda disappointed after seeing this movie, and I give up on Joko Anwar. He's a very promising director, I thought, but he already made 4 movies, and I was very disappointed. And then Copy of My Mind came out, and I really like it because he portray I think 2/3 of the movies portray a very mundane life of Jakarta people, and then suddenly there's a political happening, a political tragedy, triggered by political things, and it's very strong statement, I think. But it's very small movies with small audience also, and then he came with.
Did your mum go to see that one as well?
No, I think she learned the lesson. But after that, he made a very relaxed movie making. I think with Stanton, he was very fond of. I think I heard that he said that it's a perfect movie during his childhood, the Satan Slave. So he remake it and very popular.
Okay, I think we had another question here.
No, it wasn't a question. I was just going to say I quickly went onto IMDb to have a look at what sort of movies he's done. Because I don't know anything about the director, don't know anything about the movie, just saw it and thought it seems interesting, and we like horror, Vlado particularly, but he's a little bit like Hunger Games. Okay, let's see how it is. But just going on IMDb and seeing some of the titles, I mean, he seems to have a bit of darkness about him as well. I mean, I think I'm just guessing from the covers, there's something to do with, the devil and, and anti-religious things, and quite a lot of, dark matter, I think. And also things straying away from the Muslim country, I would assume that, it's straying very, very far away from your auto type stuff that would appeal to everybody. And this definitely wasn't like a Hollywood happy ending, you know, where the children are safe and the last family survives, you know, that there's none of that.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's quite dark in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Joko is a very sensitive person and sensitive movie maker in his way, in his bloody and gory way.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, as I mentioned before, I feel that sense of uneasiness, of, you know, surrounded by all of the violence, because we have many, probably social media help to create that atmosphere. Yeah.
But I think it's very real.
Yeah.
There's no tiptoeing around, you know, that everything happens the way it should happen, and you know, everyone gets the justification and whatever that they deserve. It's like, you know, we don't know when this will end. We don't know how long he's going to get away with this.
Yeah.
And the reality is, you know, that innocent people do die at the hands of crazy people.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, because there's quite a lot of political stuff going on, I'm not sure what's happening in Indonesia at the moment politically, because, you know, I'm not quite aware of it. I can imagine if there's a lot going on and there's things that people want to say. For example, I know a lot about Palestine. I know a lot about what's going on in, you know, in other countries, in Mexico, America, wherever. But if you want to make a political statement, I think it's a very good way to make a political statement.
Yeah, of
People
course.
are getting away with what they're getting away with, and you know,
Nice
none
point,
of the
actually,
wiser.
Yeah. But of course, Joko never admit that he make a political statement or whatsoever. He just making movies. So,
Well, I think Indonesia has a bit of a tradition as well of sort of covering political messages, I guess.
well,
from
yeah.
Well, anything overtly political in the new order would have landed you in prison. So
Yeah, I mean, even
What
going.
Even New Order began with the massive killing. Yeah.
Right.
One number said that up to 1 million people not only vanished but killed, bloodbath anywhere during 1965. State orchestrated. No, not state at that time. Yeah, military.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, yeah, military. I think.
yeah, I know, but absolutely. And
Many books about that.
I suppose, but it's, you know, in terms of going back to sort of it, films that travel out into the world that have the label Indonesian on it in recent years. There's been The Raid, that's made by Welshmen,
Of course.
but then the other film that, of course, is The Act of Killing, the Joshua Oppenheimer film about the 65 massacres. And but The Act of Killing in particular, using that particular trick of the film within the film, the making of the film, and the making of the film made within the film, as it were, is a sort of homage in a way to New Order horror films.
Yes.
Because it uses all that gore and all the things, just the real horror, unfortunately, is that it's expressing real horror, real political horror.
If you watch the movie, Joshua Oppenheimer movie, documentary actually, The Act of Killing, and then, apa judulnya bahasa Inggris?
The Look of Silence.
The Look of Silence. Sorry, the second one, yeah. The Look of Silence about 1965 massacre, and it's a documentary that I think far more frightening than than the horror movies Joko created. So I think Joko, in some way, is coping with the horror he sees. Well, it is my interpretation anyway. He always refused that he is a very political person and so on. Again, I emphasize that. But I'm not saying this on behalf of him, but it's my reading about his works. I think he's very sensitive movie maker, pick up the tension in the atmosphere of Indonesia, because we choose to ignore or to not talk about it, and the violence is always there. I don't know about the tradition. Well, I think I know a little bit. Indonesia is very, very big country with so many traditions. Some of it have, has a violent tradition in some sort of way. We could see that also, but the history is more important. The recent history, 1965, and even during Suharto's era. For example, my time, during my childhood in 1984, when I'm busy, you know, listening to Led Zeppelin and all that, I didn't know about anything. There's some massacre in Jakarta actually. I meet some of the survivors later on when I'm in high school and involved with Islamic activities, Islamic movement. The killing of Islamic, well, not really Islamic movement, but the reason is, the reason is the political Islam at that time. Suharto killed a lot of people like that during his reign. So, but we tend to, you know, ignore that. We put it under the carpet, and yeah, sometimes it's shown in the movies. For example, every year we saw one movie about 1965, and there is a every child must see it in Indonesia until 1998, you see? And in national television, in national public television, state-owned television, and one part of it is about the, you know, the torture of the generals, you know, to show that how bad it is, how evil it is. It was the Communist Party at that time, but actually the Communist Party members, 1 million, many of them is actually the member of the Communist Party at that time, or people said they are member. It killed everyone. That people said that you are a member of Communist Party at that time. So we have that history. I don't know about the tradition. Is it really affect the Joko Anwar mind? But the history.
But it's tempting to say that the popularity of the horror genre itself is a sort of an unconscious expression of
I think
those unspoken horrors.
Very
that exist at the political level.
many horror movies. You got interesting point in there. I remember that in 1980s, and that's the time Joko grew up. Me also. We have many horror movies at that time. Very popular genre, of course. Even the silat movies, the action movies, have many gory effect in it. Very violent.
It's interesting.
And the comics also.
Sorry, no, go on.
No.
No, I was just going to touch on the violence that often gets seen not just in Indonesian films but Asian cinema as a whole is something that gets spoken about quite a bit. As you touched upon, there were certain moments that you felt had similarities to some films in Japan and Korea, for example. And the reason I mention it was because I recently read an article or a journal by Mario McKenna, in which he was discussing how the Japanese were represented by British comic books in the 1960s as being sort of a people who would charge through jungles, wielding swords and chanting at the top of their lungs, and that kind of feeds into a book that Edward Said wrote on Orientalism, in which those from the East were perceived to be quite wild and dangerous. And I just wondered, how do you think films like this tie into that overall discourse? And do you think this idea is still present today?
I think it's dangerous territory. I mean, a distributor like Stanton, who picked up on Asian Extreme, who brought a lot of those movies into the UK. It's pandering to a certain version of the Orient, which emphasises those extremes of violence, and then attributes the entire Orient, gives them those features in the way that Said describes in Orientalism. So it's problematic.
Yeah.
People find violence attractive. I mean, that's sort of unfortunately a human trait to a certain degree, but the way certain Asian cinemas are packaged as extreme violence, and that being their sort of unique selling point, is obviously a marketing tool, but it becomes a sort of, for some people, a shorthand for what the Orient is, which is obviously where we've gone down a rabbit hole, the rabbit hole that Said describes.
Right.
But I mean, you know, the sort of comic book portrayal of the 60s, I'm more of a 60s boy myself. You know, I remember Banzai, you know, these sort of ridiculous figures.
Yeah.
But that, you know, that all comes out of the John Dower's book on representations of the Japanese during the Pacific War.
Yeah.
You know, the extremes of sort of, you know, the Japanese just drawn as lice and all sorts of things, and that whole, those regimes of representation, we sort of really want to be using Indonesian cinema to pull those apart and deconstruct them, but sometimes they come to us in a way that reinforces those more unfortunate Orientalist visions,
Yeah.
I would say.
But isn't that part of reality though, that guerrilla warfare and being in the jungle, not having any weapons like the West did, I mean, isn't that actually part of, you know, what got, you know, that it was a strength, it's not a weakness. I mean, I understand the West may portray them in comics, or the other countries in the area might portray certain different countries, you know, as being, like I said, leeches or lice or whatever they were. But the fact that you're having a jungle war, or, you know, out there without the guns or the machine guns, I mean, that in itself is a strength. I don't see that as a weakness.
No, I was just saying that the way in which that gets sold and marketed. But I mean, you know, parallel to that, there is, of course, you know, a whole different genre of films from the East, the whole martial arts genre, which is precisely what you're talking about. And that, you know, that Bruce Lee is a figure in which whom people took pride throughout the world.
When you think of the samurai, you think about all those traditions and whatnot, I mean, it's kind of a little bit like when people think of Africa and you've got this racialism about, you know, they're savages and they were, you know, they didn't have any culture, but they had tribes and they had, you know, they were rulers and they had so much. So I think it's more about your own perception. So maybe, I even understand, like in Korea, Taiwan, Japan, you know, all these countries have got centuries of history, and you know they're not, we don't all see as all they're united. But I'm just saying, but what I'm saying is I don't particularly see it as, you know, the weak. I mean, I understand. I'm not sure if it's the West that's trying to give that portrayal.
Yeah, no, I don't think any of us are trying to say that.
Or whether it's the countries themselves, but you're going to have that everywhere. Even to this day, you've got this now, haven't you?
I think it's two way to perceive it. Probably, I agree that it is problematic when the West try to sell the violence in the you know, narrative, the footage, the movies, the cultural product of Asian as a way to gain a new market. Probably it is problematic in some way because it continue what Edward Said said about Orientalism. But as you said, for example, there is a company, Mondo Macabro, I think, Mondo Macabro, specializing in exploitation movies. I think it's based in UK, and he picked up many of horror and violent movies, exploitation movies from Asia, Indonesia, and he treated very well. He made a documentary as a package of DVD, very luxury DVD, very luxury production. And for example, Jaka Sembung, one of the cult movies. There's a whole new market about cult movies now, and this movie, for example, fall into that category also, cult movies. And Mondo Macabro is exploiting it in some way, and many people, including Eki, who specialized in cult movies also, Indonesian cult movies, very fond of the production of Mondo Makaru. Joko Anwar, I think Eki and me first know about Mondo Makaru from Joko. Also, he loved the package of the Mondo Makaru product. And yeah, your question is not really asked about the problematic, the problematic ethic behind of all of the smart marketing, activities in cult movies.
Yeah.
But we, for example, we always like, probably it says something more about current situation, our current situation, that violence is treated very ironically and very humorously and very lightly, and we like to consume more violence in our escapism, like this one, like Joko movies and so on. And I think we enter the another problem, or should I say another question about the violence in the movies. Is it like you say, shown some kind of a strength? In our own narratives, probably in the East, it is some kind of a heroic thing to do. With all the blades and chopping the head of, the evil white people. White people always portrayed, particularly Dutch people in Indonesian war movies, always portrayed as a pure evil and so on and so on. Deserve to be chopped and, and all that. But yeah,
I think on the topic of heads being chopped off, sadly, I think we're going to have to bring things to a close for timing reasons. But I'd like to thank both Dr. Gareth and Pat Hikmat for coming and sharing their knowledge.